The Horn of Africa is once again in the global spotlight, drawing the attention of the world's media, diplomats, and analysts. This region, known for its strategic location and complex history, is facing renewed instability that threatens to spill over its borders. The arid landscapes and bustling cities of Ethiopia and Eritrea are now at the center of a growing crisis, as old wounds are reopened and new challenges emerge. Tensions are flaring between Ethiopia and Eritrea, two nations whose shared border has long been a flashpoint for conflict. Military patrols have increased, and the atmosphere at border crossings is tense, with both sides wary of the other's intentions. The fragile peace that once held is now under threat, as each country accuses the other of hostile actions and interference. Accusations are flying, with Ethiopia being blamed for supporting opposition groups inside Eritrea. These claims have reignited old hostilities, fueling suspicion and anger on both sides. International observers are watching closely, concerned that the situation could escalate into open conflict. Protests have erupted near embassies, and the rhetoric from both governments has grown increasingly heated, making diplomatic solutions more elusive. The roots of this crisis run deep. Historical grievances, dating back decades, and unresolved territorial disputes continue to fuel mistrust between these neighbors. The scars of past wars and border clashes are still fresh in the minds of many, and the lack of a clear, mutually accepted border remains a constant source of friction. Generations have grown up in the shadow of conflict, making reconciliation a daunting challenge. The stakes in this conflict are incredibly high, not just for Ethiopia and Eritrea, but for the entire Horn of Africa and even global interests. The region is a vital gateway for international shipping through the Red Sea, and any instability here could disrupt trade routes that connect Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. Regional leaders are scrambling to address security concerns, knowing that the consequences of escalation could be felt far and wide. These rising tensions threaten to disrupt not only trade, but also migration and security across the region. Border closures and increased military presence have already made life more difficult for ordinary people, from traders trying to move goods to migrants seeking safety. Security forces are on high alert, inspecting vehicles and monitoring movement, as fears of violence and instability grow. To truly understand this crisis, we must look at the long and complicated history between Ethiopia and Eritrea, the repeated failures of peace efforts, and the tangled web of alliances that shape the region. Past agreements have often been fragile, breaking down under the weight of mistrust and competing interests. Regional alliances shift frequently, making it difficult to build lasting peace. As the situation escalates, the urgency for a peaceful resolution grows ever more critical. The international community is calling for dialogue and restraint, but the path forward remains uncertain. Only through sustained diplomatic efforts and genuine commitment to peace can the Horn of Africa hope to break the cycle of conflict and build a more stable future for its people. Ethiopia and Eritrea's relationship has been shaped by decades of conflict, shifting alliances, and deep-rooted territorial disputes. The two nations, once bound together under a single flag, have experienced a turbulent history marked by war, mistrust, and a struggle for identity. Their shared past is filled with moments of both cooperation and confrontation, but it is the legacy of conflict that has left the deepest scars on both societies. When Eritrea gained independence in 1993, it was a moment of celebration for Eritreans, but it also marked a turning point for Ethiopia. Suddenly, Ethiopia found itself without direct access to the sea, becoming landlocked overnight. This loss of access to vital ports along the Red Sea not only hurt Ethiopia's economy, but also fueled a sense of grievance and insecurity that would simmer for years. The question of port access became a central issue in the relationship between the two countries, setting the stage for future disputes. Tensions erupted into open conflict in 1998, when a border dispute over the small but symbolic town of Badme escalated into a full-scale war. The fighting was brutal and relentless, lasting until 2000, and resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians on both sides. The war devastated communities, tore families apart, and left a legacy of bitterness and loss that still lingers today. The border war was not just about territory, it was about national pride, historical grievances, and the struggle for recognition. Even after a ceasefire was declared, the wounds of war remained fresh. Issues like border demarcation, the fate of disputed territories, and deep-seated mutual distrust continued to haunt both nations. Diplomatic efforts to resolve these disputes often stalled, as each side accused the other of bad faith and intransigence. The border itself became a symbol of unresolved conflict, with fences, demarcation lines, and military outposts serving as daily reminders of the fragile peace. Over the years, both countries have maintained heavy military presences along the border, with troops and armored vehicles stationed just kilometers apart. These military buildups have kept tensions high, making the region one of the most heavily fortified and volatile in Africa. For the people living near the border, the constant presence of soldiers and the threat of renewed fighting have become a part of daily life, casting a long shadow over hopes for lasting peace. The lack of lasting solutions and the repeated failure of peace agreements have left many border communities in a state of limbo. Towns that once bustled with trade and movement are now deserted, their residents displaced or living in fear. Negotiation tables sit empty, and agreements meant to bring peace gather dust, as both sides struggle to overcome decades of mistrust and animosity. The absence of meaningful progress has left the door open for renewed conflict at any moment. Today, the legacy of war and rivalry continues to shape the political landscape of the Horn of Africa. The unresolved issues between Ethiopia and Eritrea have far-reaching consequences, affecting not only the two countries, but also the stability of the entire region. Border communities remain caught in the crossfire, their lives shaped by the uncertainty and hardship that come with living on the front lines of a protracted conflict. The lessons of history are clear. Unresolved disputes and lingering animosities can ignite new crises at any time. As Ethiopia and Eritrea continue to navigate their complex relationship, the world watches closely, hoping that the mistakes of the past will not be repeated, and that a true and lasting peace can finally be achieved. In 2018, hope briefly returned to the Horn of Africa, as decades of hostility between Ethiopia and Eritrea seemed to give way to a new era of possibility. Across both nations, people poured into the streets, their faces alight with joy and relief. For many, it was the first time in a generation that peace felt within reach, and the air was thick with anticipation for a better future. The signing of the peace agreement between Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki was hailed as a historic breakthrough, not just for the two countries, but for the entire region. The world watched as the leaders shook hands, symbolizing the end of a bitter conflict that had cost tens of thousands of lives and displaced countless families. Brokered by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, the deal promised not only restored diplomatic ties, but also the reopening of borders, renewed trade, and the hope of families long separated finally reuniting. The agreement was seen as a bold step toward healing old wounds and building a foundation for lasting peace. Abiy's efforts on the world stage earned him the Nobel Peace Prize, a recognition that brought pride to Ethiopians and inspired hope across Africa. For a brief moment, it seemed as if a new chapter had begun, one defined by reconciliation, progress, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Yet, beneath the surface, key issues remained unresolved. The question of border demarcation lingered, with both sides wary and political mistrust simmering just out of sight. Many communities living along the border continued to face uncertainty, unsure if the peace would hold or if old animosities would return. The lack of real progress on these critical issues soon began to erode the goodwill generated by the accord. Hopes for open borders and renewed cooperation faded as talks stalled and promises went unfulfilled. Disappointment set in, and the initial euphoria gave way to growing skepticism and frustration among ordinary citizens. As old disputes resurfaced and tensions flared, the fragile peace began to unravel. Sporadic clashes and renewed military buildups along the border signaled that the underlying issues had not been truly resolved. The sense of optimism that once filled the streets was replaced by anxiety and fear of a return to conflict. The dream of lasting peace, so vivid just months before, now seemed to slip further from reach. For many, the brief respite was a painful reminder of how fragile hope can be in a region scarred by decades of conflict. New allegations claim Ethiopia is arming and training Eritrean opposition groups near the border. These reports, though unverified, have inflamed tensions and raised fears of proxy conflict. Groups like the Eritrean Democratic Alliance are at the center of these accusations, seen as threats by Eritrea's government. Ethiopia denies involvement, but the claims have heightened regional anxiety. The risk of indirect confrontations and escalation is real, threatening broader stability. This episode highlights the region's complex and volatile geopolitics. Careful diplomacy is needed to prevent a dangerous spiral. Ethiopia has strongly denied supporting Eritrean opposition groups, insisting its border activities are for security only. Despite official denials, some sources suggest Ethiopia may be leveraging local groups to expand its influence. Ethiopia has also accused Eritrea of plotting with the Tigray People's Liberation Front, escalating the war of words. These mutual accusations have been taken to the United Nations, underscoring the seriousness of the standoff. The situation is marked by denials, suspicion, and strategic maneuvering on both sides. Regional and international observers are watching closely for any sign of escalation. Eritrea has fired back, accusing Ethiopia of sponsoring terrorism and destabilizing the region. Eritrean officials dismiss Ethiopia's claims of a military buildup as provocative and baseless. Eritrea frames itself as a victim of foreign-backed plots, deepening mistrust. The government alleges that outside powers are aiding Ethiopia's efforts to arm opposition groups. This narrative of external interference complicates the already tense relationship. As both sides trade accusations, the risk of open conflict grows. International mediation is urgently needed to prevent further deterioration. The Ethiopia-Eritrea standoff has major implications for the Horn of Africa and beyond. Any escalation could disrupt global trade through the Red Sea, a vital shipping corridor. Renewed conflict risks triggering humanitarian crises and mass displacement. Regional powers and global actors are closely monitoring the situation, with shifting alliances at play. The involvement of countries like the US and UAE adds further complexity. The stakes extend far beyond the region, demanding urgent international attention. Stability in the Horn of Africa is crucial for global security and economic interests. Analysts see Ethiopia's alleged support for Eritrean opposition as a bid for leverage, especially regarding Red Sea access. Some argue Ethiopia is using proxies to strengthen its position without direct confrontation. Eritrea's strong reaction is seen as an attempt to rally domestic support and frame itself as a victim of foreign aggression. Both countries are pursuing strategic goals amid shifting alliances and old grievances. Expert insights are key to understanding the complex motivations behind this volatile standoff. The future of Ethiopia-Eritrea relations hangs in the balance, with outcomes ranging from open war to renewed diplomacy. Escalation would have devastating consequences for both nations and the wider region. A peaceful resolution could stabilize the Horn of Africa and protect vital trade routes. The international community, especially the African Union, must step up to facilitate dialogue. Addressing root causes is essential for lasting peace and development. The world cannot afford to ignore the stakes in the Horn of Africa. Now is the time for bold action and genuine commitment to peace.